"Hector leaves a damn large track," Skull said to Famous Shoes after they'd been walking for 4 days. "If we had some form of torch, I believe I could track him at night." "We don't have a torch," Famous Shoes pointed out. They were in country where there was little wood. When they made little fires to cook the game they killed, jackrabbits mostly, they had to use the branches of creosote bushes or chaparral. "Hector will probably be slimmed down a little when I catch him," Skull said. "There's not much fodder out here." "They may have to eat him soon," Famous Shoes warned. "I doubt that," Skull said. "I don't think Kicking Wolf stole him to eat. I expect he stole him mainly to embarrass me. I'm for walking all night if you think we can stay with the track." Famous Shoes thought Skull was crazy. The man wanted to walk forever without sleep. Kicking Wolf, the man they were following, was crazy too. He was taking the horse straight to Mexico, which made no sense. Kicking Wolf's people did not live in Mexico. They lived in the other direction. He himself was growing tired of being a scout for the whites. One crazy man was chasing another crazy man, with his help. Famous Shoes decided it must be the tobacco Skull chewed all day that made him able to walk so far. He did not want to sleep long at night and grew restless when there were clouds over the moon, so Famous Shoes could not track. On those nights Skull sat by the fire and talked for hours. He said there were forests to the south so thick that little beasts called monkeys could live their whole lives in the trees, never touching the ground. Famous Shoes didn't believe the story. He had never seen trees that thick. He had begun to think of walking away some night, leaving Skull while he napped. After all, he had not yet got to visit his grandmother in her new home on the Arkansas. He could understand Skull's anger at Kicking Wolf for stealing his horse, but the decision to follow on foot was more evidence of Skull's insanity. Kicking Wolf traveled hard. They were not going to catch him on foot, not unless he got sick and had to stop for a few days. The evidence of the tracks was plain. Kicking Wolf and Three Birds would soon be in Mexico. Though he and Skull were walking exceptionally fast, they only had 2 legs, whereas the horses they were following had 4. Famous Shoes told Skull as much, but Skull would not give up, not even when they reached the desolate country where the Pecos angled toward the Rio Grande. In that country the water was so bitter from the white soil that one's turds came out white, a very bad thing. White turds meant that they were in the wrong place. That was how Famous Shoes felt. He was thinking more about walking off, but Skull had quickly mastered tracking and might follow him and shoot him if he left. He did not want to get shot by Skull's big rifle. He had begun to hope that they would run into some bandits or some Indians, anything that might distract Skull long enough that he could slip away. But even if there was a fight, escape would still be risky. Who knew what a crazy man such as Big Horse Skull might do? When they were only a day away from the Rio Grande, Famous Shoes noticed a curious thing about the tracks they were following. He did not mention it at first, but he might as well have mentioned it, because Skull was such a good tracker now that he noticed it too. Skull stopped and squatted down so as to study the tracks better. When he spat tobacco juice, he spat it carefully to the side so as not to blur the message of the tracks. "By God, he knows we're following him," Skull said. "He sent Mr. Three Birds back to spy on us. Now Three Birds has marked us and gone back to report. Am I right, Professor?" That was exactly correct. So correct that Famous Shoes did not feel the need to reply. Three Birds had come back and spied on them. "He marked us and he's gone," Skull said. "I expect he's reported to his boss by now." "Kicking Wolf is not his boss," Famous Shoes corrected. "Three Birds travels where he pleases." Skull got up and walked around for a few minutes, thinking. "I wonder if there's a big camp of Indians down there somewhere that he's taking my horse to," he said. "No, there is no camp," Famous Shoes assured him. "Comanches won't camp where their shit is white." "I don't care for this country much myself," Skull said. "Let's get out of it." The next day, at a winter sunset, they came to the Rio Grande. Skull stopped for a minute to look north toward a long curve of the river. The water was gold with the thin sunset. There was no sign of Hector or the 2 Indians, but to his surprise he saw an old man walking slowly along the riverbank going south. A large dog walked beside him. "Now, there's somebody. Who would it be walking this river alone this time of year?" he asked. When Famous Shoes saw the old man coming, he gave a start. Though he had never seen the old man before, he knew who he was. "He is the old one who walks by the river," Famous Shoes said. "He lives in a cave where the river is born. The river is his child. Every year he walks with it down to its home in the great water. Then he goes back to his cave where the river is born, high in the Sierra. His wolf walks with him and kills his food." "His wolf?" Skull said, looking more closely. "I took it for a dog." "He has been here forever," Famous Shoes said. "The Apaches believe that if you see him, you will die." "Well, I've seen him and I ain't dead," Skull commented. "I just hope that wolf don't bite." "If I had known I would see the old one, I would not have come with you," Famous Shoes said. "I need to see my grandmother, but now I don't know if I will be living long enough to find her." Skull had to admit that the sight of the lone figure coming along the river at dusk was a little eerie. Certainly it was not an ordinary thing. They went on to the river and waited for the old man to come. When he appeared, the wolf had vanished. The old man came slowly. His white hair hung to his waist and he wore buckskin clothing. "I think he has stopped speaking because he is so old," Famous Shoes said. "I'll try him with a little Yankee English. He might want to stop and sup with us," Skull said. Earlier in the day he had shot a small owl. His plan for dinner was to have owl soup. "Hello, sir, this is a welcome surprise," Einish said when the old man came to where they waited. "My name is Einish Skull. I'm a Bostoner, and this is Famous Shoes, the great professor of tracking. If you'd care to join us in a meal, we're having owl soup." The old man fixed Skull with a lively blue eye. "You spit tobacco juice up and down the front of yourself," the old man said in a voice far from weak. "I'll have a chaw of tobacco if you've any left after all your wasteful spittin'." Skull reached in his pocket and pulled out his plug, by then so diminished that he simply handed it to the old man, who had spoken as matter-of-factly as if they had met on Boston Common. "It's true I'm reckless with my spittles," Skull said. "You're welcome to this tobacco. How about the owl soup?" "I'll pass. Can't digest owls," the old man said. He carried a long rifle, the stock of which he set against the ground. Then he leaned comfortably on his own weapon. "I fear it's a weak offering, but we have nothing else," Skull admitted. "Don't need it. My wolf will bring me a varmint," the old man said. He lifted one leg and rested it against the other thigh. "I'm Einish Skull, and I'm in pursuit of a horse thief," Skull said. "It's my war horse that was taken, and I want him back. Who might you be, if I may ask?" "I'm Ephaniah, the Lord of the Last Day," the old man said. From down the river there was the howl of a wolf. "Excuse me, you're what?" Skull asked. "I'm the Lord of the Last Day," the old man said. "That's my wolf, howling to let me know he's caught a tasty varmint." He put down his other foot and without another word or gesture began moving on down the river. Famous Shoes gestured. On a rise, still lit by the last of the afterglow, the wolf waited. The old man was soon lost in the deepening dusk. "Now that's curious," Skull said. "I'm out my tobacco, and I don't know a thing more than I did. Why would he call himself the Lord of the Last Day? What does it mean?" "The Apaches may be right," Famous Shoes said. "When you see the Old One, your last day may be close." "If mine's close, I'd like to have a good feed first," Skull commented. "But I won't, not unless the hunting improves." "We don't have to eat the owl. I hear ducks," Famous Shoes said. Skull heard them too and looked around in time to see a large flock of teal curve over the river and come back to settle on the water. "When it's dark, I will go down and catch some," Famous Shoes said. "Help yourself, but I plan to scorch this owl anyway," Skull said. "I won't have provender going to waste." When Three Birds caught up with Kicking Wolf, he was walking out of a gully dragging a small antelope he had just killed. The antelope was only a fawn, but Three Birds was excited anyway. They had had little meat since stealing the buffalo horse. The sight of the dead fawn made Three Birds so hungry he forgot his news. "Let's cook it now," he said. "Why didn't you shoot its mother?" "Why didn't you kill her?" Kicking Wolf asked. "Where have you been?" "I had to go a long way to find Skull," Three Birds said. "He is following us, but he is walking." At first Kicking Wolf did not believe it. Three Birds often lived in his own dream time for days at a stretch. Often he would ride around so long dreaming that he would forget what errand he had been sent on. When someone reminded him that he had been supposed to secure a particular piece of information, he would often just make up whatever came into his head, which is what he was probably doing when he claimed that Skull was following them on foot. Kicking Wolf had expected pursuit and kept up a fast pace to elude it. How could Skull expect to catch him if he was on foot? He sent Three Birds back to investigate, thinking that perhaps Buffalo Hump or some other warriors had fallen on Skull and killed him. Now, though, Three Birds had come back with a far-fetched tale that no sensible person could believe. Three Birds was just trying to explain why he had been gone 4 days. Now all he could think about was eating the little antelope. "I don't believe you. Skull had several horses," Kicking Wolf said. "Why would he follow us on foot?" Three Birds was offended. He had ridden for days with little food into the country of the enemy to find out what Kicking Wolf wanted to know. He had found it out, and now Kicking Wolf didn't believe him. "He is following us on foot, and the Kickapoo is with him," he said. "Skull is 4 days behind, but he walks fast and does not sleep much. If we wait, we can kill him and the Kickapoo too." Kicking Wolf gave the matter a little more thought as he skinned the young antelope. Three Birds usually abandoned his lies if questioned closely, but he was not abandoning this lie, which might mean that it wasn't a lie. Big Horse Skull was known to do strange things. Often he would skin little birds that were much too small to eat. Then he would throw the birds away and pack their skins with salt. When he traveled, he would sometimes pick up beetles and other bugs and put them in small jars. Once he even sacked up some bats that flew out of a cave. What such activities added up to was some kind of witchery, that was plain. That he had chosen to follow them on foot was just more evidence that he was some kind of a witch man. Lots of Indians were out on the plains hunting. If they had seen Skull, they would have killed him, yet he was still alive, which suggested more witchery. "Famous Shoes would like to sleep, but Skull wakes him up and makes him walk," Three Birds said. "When there is no moon, they burn sticks to help them find the tracks." Kicking Wolf decided Three Birds was being truthful. He gave him the best parts of the fawn for traveling fast to bring him the information. "We will soon be in the Sierra," Kicking Wolf said. "Ahumado will find us. I don't know what he will do. I think he will like the buffalo horse, but I don't know. Maybe he won't like it that we have come." Three Birds was eating so fast that he could not figure out what Kicking Wolf was getting at. Of course no one knew what Ahumado would like or what he would do. He was the Black Vaquero. He had killed so many people that everyone had lost count. Sometimes he killed whole villages, throwing all the people in a well and letting them drown. Or he might make the villagers dig a pit and then bury them alive. He had an old man who was skilled at flaying. Sometimes he would have the old man take all the skin off a man or a woman who had done something he disliked. He stuck people on sharpened trees and let the trees poke up through them. It was pointless to talk about what such a man might like or not like. "If he doesn't like us, he might stick us on a tree," Kicking Wolf said. Three Birds grew more puzzled. Why was Kicking Wolf telling him all these things that he already knew? Ahumado only did bad things. Sometimes he hung people in cages and let them starve, or he might throw them into a pit full of scorpions and snakes. But all this was common knowledge among the Comanches, many of whom had died at the hands of the Black Vaquero. Did Kicking Wolf think such talk would scare him? Was he trying to suggest that he run away like a coward? "I don't know why you are taking the buffalo horse to this man, but if that is what you want to do, then I am going too," Three Birds said. "It is your choice," Kicking Wolf said. He was a little ashamed of himself for trying to scare Three Birds away. Three Birds was a brave warrior, even though he didn't fight very well and was often wandering in the dream time when he should be paying more attention to things. When he stole the buffalo horse, he thought he would take him to Ahumado alone. There would be much power flow from such an act. He would take a great horse from the most powerful Texan and sell him to the terrible bandit of the South. No one else had done such a thing. It was a thing that would be sung forever. Even if Ahumado killed him, his feet would live in the songs. He had not meant to share it with anybody. He had thought when they reached the river he would send Three Birds back and go into the Sierra Perdida alone, riding the buffalo horse. He would go to the stronghold of the Black Vaquero and offer him the great horse in exchange for women. If he took the horse in and lived, he would have the power of a great chief. Buffalo Hump and Slow Tree would have to include him in their councils. There would be great singing because of what he had done. But Three Birds had come with him, and he could not insult him because he was a little prone to wandering in the dream time. Going to the stronghold of Ahumada would be a great test. He could not tell his friend not to come. "I thought you might want to go home and see your family," Kicking Wolf said. "But if you don't, then we had better eat this little antelope and ride through the night." "I don't need to see anyone at home," Three Birds said simply. "I want to go with you. If we ride all night, Skull will not catch up." "That's right," Kicking Wolf said as he cracked off a couple of the little antelope's ribs. "Big Horse Skull will not catch up." Augustus felt stunned. For a moment he was unable to speak. Once, while he was reluctantly trying his hand at blacksmithing, a horse that he was shoeing caught him with a powerful kick that struck him full in the diaphragm. For 10 minutes he could only gasp for breath. He could not have spoken a word had his life depended on it. That was how he felt now, standing in the sunny Austin street with Clara Forsythe, the girl he had raced in to kiss only an hour before, holding his hand. The words Clara had just spoken were the words he had long feared to hear, and their effect on him was as paralyzing as the kick of the horse. "I know it's hard news," Clara said, "but I've made up my mind, and it's not fair to hold it back." After leaving Governor Pease, Augustus had gone straight to a barber, meaning to get shaved and barbered properly before hurrying back to Clara to collect more kisses. She had consented to one more, but then had let him out the back door of the store so that neither her father nor a casual customer would interrupt them while she was telling Gus the truth she owed him, which was that she had decided to marry Robert F. Allen, a horse trader from Nebraska. Augustus went white with the news. He was still white. Clara stood close to him and held his hand, letting him take his time while he absorbed the blow. She knew it was a terrible blow, too. Augustus had courted her ardently from the day he met her, when she had been barely 16. She knew that, though much given to whoring, he loved only her and would marry her in an instant if she would consent. Several times she had been tempted to give in, allow him what he wanted, and attempt to make a marriage with him. Yet some cool part of her, some tendency to think and consider, when she was most tempted just to stop thinking and open her arms, had kept her from saying yes. What stopped her was the feeling that had come over her when he rushed off to see Governor Pease. One kiss, and then you're gone. Augustus was a Texas Ranger. At the end of the kissing, or what followed it, there'd be an hour when he would be gone. She would have to carry for days or weeks a heavy sense of his absence. She would have to cope with all the sad feelings that assailed her when Gus was away. Clara was active. She wanted to live the full life of her emotions every day. She didn't like the feeling that a full life would have to wait for the day Augustus returned, if he did return. Almost every time the Ranger troop left Austin, there would be a man among them who did not come back. It was a fact Clara couldn't forget. No woman could. And she had seen the anguish and the struggle that was the lot of frontier widows. "If this is a joke, it's a poor one," Augustus said when he could find breath for speech. But Clara was looking at him calmly, her honest eyes fixed on his. Of course she loved to tease him, and he would have liked to persuade himself that she was teasing him this time. But her eyes danced when she teased him, and her eyes were not dancing. Not now. "It ain't a joke, Gus," she said. "It's a fact. We're going to be married on Sunday." "But you kissed me," Augustus said. "When I came running in, you called me your ranger just like you always do." "Why, you are my ranger. You always will be," Clara said. "Of course I kissed you. I'll always kiss you when you come to see me. I suppose I have the right to kiss my friends, and I'll never be so married that I won't be a friend." "But I'm a captain now," Gus said, "a captain in the Texas Rangers. Couldn't you have at least waited until I got home with the news?" "Nope," Clara said firmly. "I've spent enough of my life waiting for you to get home from some jaunt. I don't like waiting much. I don't like going weeks not even knowing if you're alive. I don't like wondering if you've found another woman in some town I've never been to." At the memory of all her anxious waiting, a tear started in her eye. "I wasn't meant for waiting and wondering, Gus," she said. "It was making me an old woman before my time. Bob Allen's no cavalier. He'll never have your dash, I know that. But I'll always know where he is. I won't have to be wondering." "Well, hell, I'll quit the Rangers if a stay-at-home is what you're looking for," Gus said, very annoyed. "I'll quit 'em today." He knew even as he said the words that it was a thing he had often offered to do over the years when Clara taxed him with his absences, but he never quite got around to quitting. Now he would, though, captain or no captain. What was being a captain compared to being married to Clara? To his dismay, Clara shook her head. "No," she said. "It's too late, Gus. I gave Bob Allen my promise. Besides, being a captain in the Rangers is what you've always wanted. You've talked of it many times." "Well, I was a fool," Gus said. "Being a captain just means making a lot of decisions I ain't smart enough to make. Woodrow, he's always studying. Let him make 'em." "I'm quitting, I mean it," he said, feeling desperate. He felt he had just as soon die if he couldn't change Clara's decision. "Hush that, it's nonsense," Clara said. "I'm promised now. Do you think I'm so light a girl that I'd break my promise just because you quit a job?" Augustus felt a terrible flash of anger. "No, if you promised, I expect you'll go through with it, even if it ruins both our lives and his too," he said. "You shut up, Gus," Clara said, with a flash to match his. "I've been telling you what I needed for 10 years. If you'd wanted me enough to quit the Rangers, you would have quit long ago. But you didn't. You just kept riding off time after time with Woodrow Call. You could have had me, but you chose him." "Why, that's foolish. He's just my pard," Gus said. "It may be foolish, but it's how I felt and how I feel," Clara said. She calmed herself with an effort. She had not called him into the street to fight over the disappointments of a decade, though it had not all been disappointment by any means. Augustus didn't know what to do. Though it appeared to be a hopeless thing, he didn't know how to simply give up. The hope of someday marrying Clara had been the deepest hope of his life. What would his life be with that hope lost? He could not even formulate a guess, though he knew it would be bleak and black. "When will you be leaving?" he asked finally in a flat voice. "Why, Sunday," Clara said. "We're going to New Orleans and take the steamer up the Mississippi and the Missouri. It'll be chilly traveling, I expect. At least the last part of it will." Gus felt such a weight inside him that he didn't know how he was even going to walk away. "Then it's goodbye, I guess," he said. "For a while, yes," Clara said. "My hope is that you'll visit in about 10 years. "Visit you once you're married? Now, why would you want that?" Augustus asked, startled by the remark. "Because I'd want you to know my children," Clara said. "I'd want them to have your friendship." Augustus was silent for a bit. Clara was looking at him with something in her eyes that he couldn't define. Though she had just broken his heart, she still seemed to want something of him. What, he was not sure. "You're just saying that now, Clara," he said, though he thought his throat might close up with sadness and leave him unable to speak. "Bobby won't be wanting me there, and you won't either once you've been married a while," he said finally. Clara shook her head and put her arms around him. "I can't claim to know too much about marriage yet, but there's one thing I know for sure. I'll never be so married that I won't need your friendship. Don't you forget that," she said. Then tears started in her eyes again. She turned abruptly and walked quickly back into her store. Augustus stayed where he was for a bit, looking at the store. Whether staying or returning, looking at that store had long filled him with hope. The sight of the Forsythe store, just a plain frame building, affected him more powerfully than any sight on earth. For the store contained Clara. There he had met her. There for years they had kissed, quarreled, joked, teased. Often they had made plans for a future together, a future they would now never have. When he walked into the little room in the rough bunkhouse that he shared with Woodrow Call, what he felt in his heart must have showed in his face. Woodrow was just about to go out, but the sight of Gus stopped him. He had never seen Gus with quite such a strange look on his face. "Are you sick?" Call asked. Gus made no reply. He sat down on his cot and took off his hat. "I have to pay a call, but I'll be back soon," Call said. "The governor wants to see us again." "Why, we done saw him, the fool," Gus asked. "We're captains now," Call reminded him. "Did you think we were just going to see him that one time?" "Yes. I'd hoped I wouldn't have to look at the jackass again," Gus said. "I don't know what's the matter," Call said, "but I hope it wears off quick. You needn't be sulky just because the governor wants to see us." Augustus suddenly drew back his fist and punched the center of the cot he sat on as hard as he could. The cot, a spindly-legged thing, immediately collapsed. "Darn it, now you broke your bed," Call said in surprise. "Don't matter, I won't be sleeping in it anyway," Augustus said. "I wish that damn governor would send us off again today, because I'm ready to go. If I ain't rangering, I mean to be out drinking all night, or else reside in a whorehouse." Call had no idea what had come over his friend. Before he could investigate, Augustus suddenly got up and walked past him out the door. "I'll be down at the saloon in case you lose my track," he said. "I doubt I'll lose your track," Call said, still puzzled. By then Augustus was in the street, and he didn't turn. Call, about to leave Maggie's, was in a hurry, aware that he was almost late for his appointment with the governor, and he still had to find Gus and drag him out of whatever saloon he was in. He didn't at first understand what Maggie had just said to him. She had said something about a child, but his mind was on his meeting with the governor, and he hadn't quite taken her comment in. "What? I guess I need to clean out my ears," he said. Maggie didn't want to repeat it. She didn't want it to be true, and yet it was true. "I said I'm going to have a baby," she said. Call looked at Maggie again and saw that she was about to cry. She just made him coffee and fed him a tasty beefsteak, the best food he had had in a month. She had a plate in her hand, but the hand that held the plate was not steady. Of course, she usually got upset when he had to leave, even if he was just going to the bunkhouse. Maggie wanted him to live with her, a thing he could not agree to do. The part about the baby hardly registered with him until he saw the look in her eyes. The look in her eyes was desperate. "The baby's yours, Woodrow," she said. "I'm hoping you'll help me bring it up." Call took his hand off the doorknob. "It's mine?" he asked, puzzled. "Well, it's ours, I mean," Maggie said, watching his face as she said it to see if there was any hope at all. For 3 weeks, ever since she was sure that she was pregnant, she had anguished over how to tell Woodrow. Over and over she practiced how she would tell him. Her best hope, her nicest dream, was that Woodrow would want the baby to be his and also, maybe, want to marry her and care for her as his wife. Sometimes Maggie could imagine such a thing happening when she thought about Woodrow and the baby, but mostly she had the opposite conviction. He might hate the notion. In fact, he probably would hate it. He might walk out the door and never see her again. After all, he was a Texas Ranger captain now, and she was just a whore. He was not obligated to come back to see her, much less to marry her or help her with the child. Every time she thought of telling him, Maggie felt despair. She didn't know what it would mean for their future. But she was pregnant, a truth that would soon be apparent. Now the words were out. Woodrow just seemed puzzled. He had not flinched or looked at her cruelly. "Well, Maggie," he said, and stopped. He seemed mainly distracted. Maggie had put on a robe but hadn't tied it yet. He was looking at her belly as if he expected to see what she was talking about. "This is surprising news," he said, rather stiffly, but with no anger in his voice. The fact was, Call had set his mind on the next task, which was locating Gus and getting on to the governor's office. He had never been good at getting his mind to consider 2 facts at once, much less 2 big facts. Maggie was slim and lovely, no different than she had been the day he had ridden off to Fort Belknap. It occurred to him that she might just be having a fancy of some kind. Gus had told him that Clara often had fancies about babies. Maybe she had just got it into her head that she was having a baby. It might be something like Gus McCrae's conviction that he was going to stumble onto a gold mine every time they went out on patrol. Gus was always poking into holes and caves looking for his gold mine. But there wasn't a gold mine in any of the caves, and there might not be a baby in Maggie either. What he didn't want to do was upset her just when it was necessary to leave. She'd been sweet to him on his return and had fixed him a tasty meal at her expense. Maggie was a little encouraged by the fact that Woodrow didn't seem angry. He had an appointment with the governor and was clearly eager to get out the door, which was normal. If he went on with his task, perhaps he would think about the baby and come to like the notion. "You go on, I know you're in a hurry," she said. "Why, yes. We can discuss this later," Call said, relieved that no further delay was required. He tipped his hat to her before going out the door. The minute he left, Maggie hurried over to the window so she could watch him as he walked down the street. She had always liked the way he walked. He was not a graceful man, particularly. Even when he was relaxed, he moved a little stiffly, but his very awkwardness touched her. He needed someone to take care of him, Woodrow did, and Maggie wanted to be the one to do it. She knew she could take care of him fine, without ever letting him suspect that he needed to be taken care of. She knew, too, that he liked to feel independent. Maggie just wanted her chance. Despite herself, watching him walk away, her heart swelled with hope. He hadn't said anything bad when she told him about the baby. He had not even looked annoyed, and he often looked annoyed if she asked him any question at all or detained him even for a minute when he was in a hurry to leave. An appointment with the governor was important, and yet he had stopped and listened to her. Maybe, after all, the whoring was over, she thought. Maybe Woodrow Call, the only man she had ever loved, would think about it all and decide to marry her. Maybe he was going to make her dream come true. Inez Skull, dressed entirely in black, was sitting in Governor Pease's office when Call and Augustus were ushered in. Bingham had come to fetch them and had not said a word on the buggy ride. What was more surprising to Call was that Gus had not said a word either. In the whole stretch of their friendship, Call could not remember an occasion when Gus had been silent for so long. And the buggy ride only took 10 minutes, not a long silence by normal standards. "Are you sick, or are you so drunk you can't even talk?" Call asked near the end of the ride. Augustus continued to stare off into the distance. He did not speak a word. In his mind's eye, he saw the woman he loved, the woman he would always love, steaming up a broad brown river with Bob Allen, horse trader of Nebraska. His rival had won. That was the bleak fact. He saw no reason to chatter just to please Woodrow Call. Though Madame Skull was silent, she was a presence they could not ignore. When they stepped in, the governor was busy with a secretary, so they stood where they were, hats in hand, just inside the door of the broad room. To their embarrassment, Madame Skull got up and came and gave them a silent inspection, looking them over from head to foot. She was bold in her looking, too, so bold that both men were made distinctly uncomfortable under her silent gaze. "Here they are, Inez, our 2 young captains," the governor said when the secretary left. "They brought the troop home safe and rescued 3 captives besides." "I'd say it's beginner's luck," Madame Skull said, in a tone that stung Gus McCrae to the quick. "Excuse me, ma'am, but we ain't beginners," he said. "Woodrow and me have been Texas Rangers a good 10 years already." 10 years, Madame Skull said. "Then why haven't you learned to stand at attention properly? Your posture is a disgrace. It's a slouch, not a stance, and it doesn't bode well. And the other one needs barbering," she added, turning to the governor. "I'm afraid I must decline to be impressed." "But we ain't soldiers. We're rangers," Gus said, unable to restrain himself in the face of such insults. "Now, McCrae, you hush," the governor said. He knew that Inez Skull was capable of high, even cyclonic furies, and he did not want a cyclone to strike his office just then. "This is Mrs. Skull," he added hastily. "She's upset that the captain didn't come home with the troop." "Shut up, Ed," Mrs. Skull said, to the young ranger's great shock. It couldn't be proper for a woman to tell a governor to shut up, even if she was the captain's wife. But the governor immediately shut up. "I am not so ill-bred as to be upset," Inez said. "I'm angry. Do either of you have a notion as to where my husband is?" "Somewhere along the Pecos River, I reckon, ma'am," Call said. "I hope he drowns in it then, the stumpy little mongrel," Madame Skull said, turning to the governor. Governor Pease had retreated a step or two and looked very out of sorts. "He is rather a mongrel, you know, Ed," she said to the governor. "I don't follow you, Inez. He's a Skull, and I believe they're a fine family," Governor Pease replied. "Yes, but rather bred down, if you want the truth," Madame Skull said. "Inish is the only one left with any fight, and most of that comes from his mother. She was a Polish servant, I believe. Inish's father was Evanswood Skull. He rose rather high in Mr. Madison's government, but he would have the Polish maid. So Inish is a mongrel, and that's that." "Fight's worth more than breeding when you're policing a frontier," the governor remarked. "Perhaps, but I did not agree to police any frontiers," Inez replied. "I need my operas and my lapdogs and my fine shops. Given my shops and a little Italian singing, I can get by rather well without that black mongrel of a husband." Augustus wanted to look at Woodrow to see how he was digesting all this, but Madame Skull stood right in front of them. He didn't dare turn his eyes. "Did the ugly little brute give you any warning, or did he just sniff the air and walk off?" she asked. "Inish usually leaves at a moment of maximum inconvenience for everyone but himself. Did you wake up expecting him to leave the morning he took himself away?" "No, ma'am," both said at once. "He just decided to go try to get his horse back," Call added. "Bosh! The horse is just an excuse," Inez said. "Inish doesn't care about horses, not even Hector. He'd just as soon eat one as ride one." "But, Inez, what other reason would he have to walk off like that?" the puzzled governor asked, still nervous about the possible cyclone. "I don't know, and neither do these slouchy boys," Madame Skull said. "We tried to talk him out of walking, but he wouldn't listen," Call informed her. "He was the captain. There wasn't much we could do," Augustus said. "No, he's a damn restless mongrel. He wanted to walk off, and he did walk off, leaving everybody, including me," Madame Skull said. "It's abominable behavior, I say." "Ma'am, he left with Famous Shoes, who's a fine tracker," Call pointed out. "Famous Shoes knows the country. I expect he'll bring the captain out." "You don't know the man," Inez snapped. "He won't show up unless he's fetched. I expect he'll find his way to the sea, and the next thing I know there'll be a telegram from India or somewhere expecting me to pack up and follow. I won't have it. Not this time." There was silence in the room. Madame Skull's last statement left everyone in doubt. Did she intend to go after the captain herself? Her black eyes were so filled with anger that when she looked at Augustus he felt like stepping back a step or two, yet she was so forceful that he was afraid to move a muscle, and Woodrow was just as paralyzed. Governor Pease stared out the window, uncomfortable and silent. "Will you fetch him for me, gentlemen?" she asked, softening her voice even as she raked them with her eyes. "If we don't catch him soon, I might have to wait a year for news, and I won't tolerate it." "Of course you have my permission," the governor quickly added. "I'd recommend taking a small force, perhaps 4 men besides yourselves." "The sooner you get started, the better," Inez said. In Gus's mind was the coming torment of Clara's wedding. He saw Madame Skull's request as a God-sent hope of escape. "I'm ready. I can leave in an hour," Augustus said, "or less if it's required." Call was very startled by his friend's wild statement. They had scarcely been back a day from a long expedition. The men were tired and the horses gaunt. Were they to set off without rest to find a man who might refuse to come back even if they found him, which was by no means a certain thing? Before he could speak, Mrs. Skull suddenly smiled at Augustus. "Why, Mr. McCrae, such impetuosity," she said. "I wouldn't think of having you depart quite that soon. No doubt you have arrangements to make. A sweetheart to say goodbye to, perhaps?" "I ain't got a sweetheart, and I'm ready to leave as soon as possible. I can clean my guns and catch my horse," Gus said. He didn't think he could endure being in Austin much more than another hour, not with the triumphant Bob Allen taking up all Clara's time, as he would for the rest of her life. If the boys couldn't leave at once, then he meant to leave anyway and camp somewhere along the route, with a bottle of whiskey to keep him company. Call was astonished, but Gus's peculiar desire to depart at once wasn't the only thing that concerned him. "What if we find him and he won't come back?" he asked. "Oh, I'm sure if you tell him Inez is anxious, he'll be happy to come back with you," the governor said. His own main desire was to get Inez Skull out of his office before she broke into a fit. Inish hates to be checked, particularly when he's running away from his duties, Inez said. They may have to arrest him. Just find him and ask him politely to come back, Governor Pease said, remembering that Inish Skull himself was no slouch when it came to throwing fits. Besides, he was a popular hero and not loath to act the part. Putting such a popular man under arrest might lead to political catastrophe. He might even lose the governorship if Inish stood against him. It was too much to risk. Ask him politely, what good will that do? Madame Skull said. Inish ain't polite. What'll we do then, ma'am, if we find him and he won't come back? Call inquired. How should I know? I ain't a great Texas Ranger. I'm just a wife, she said. But don't come back without him. I won't have it. Come along, Mr. McCrae. She started for the door. Augustus wasn't sure he had heard correctly. Do what, ma'am? He asked. Come along. Are you deaf? Madame Skull said, turning briefly. I'd like you to walk me home if you ain't too busy saying goodbye to your sweethearts. Ma'am, I just told you I got no sweethearts to say goodbye to, Gus repeated. Capital, Madame Skull said. In that case, I may ask you to stay for tea. Being abandoned by one's husband does make one so lonely. Then she looked over at Call with a little smile. I would ask you too, Captain Call, she said, but I expect you're more of a ladies' man than Captain McCrae. I imagine you do have sweethearts who will expect you soon. Oh, no, ma'am. Captain McCrae's a ladies' man, Call said, though Gus glared at him. I guess I better go see which of the boys is in the mood to ride out again on short notice. I think I'd locate a barber first, sir, and let him clean you up a little, Mrs. Skull said. I believe you'd be rather handsome if you were barbered properly. Thank you, Call said. I intended to get barbered before I came to see the governor. Then why didn't you, sir? Inez asked. You'd have made a far better impression if you'd gone to that little bit of trouble. No wonder the captain walked off, Call thought. He was not about to tell Madame Skull what he'd done instead of getting barbered, and he resented that she'd been so impertinent as to ask. Where do you think he went, Ed? Madame Skull asked the governor, her eyes fixed on Call, even though Augustus had gone to the door and was holding it open. Went? I don't know where he went, the governor said impatiently. I've just met Captain Call and am not familiar with his habits. I expect he went to a whore, Inez said with a little laugh. He looks like the kind of man who would put whoring before barbering. Don't you agree, Governor? Governor Pease had had enough. The woman would stay forever, it seemed, and he was the governor. Any man would put whoring before barbering, Inez, he replied. It would be the normal thing. That's it. I knew you had starch, Ed Pease, Madame Skull said. I expect I ought to ask you to my tea party instead of this green ear of corn here. But then you're the governor, you've got duties. I've got duties, Governor Pease agreed as Madame Skull swept out the door. Call glanced at Augustus, puzzled as to why he would twice say he had no sweetheart to say goodbye to when Call himself had just seen him holding hands with Clara outside the general store. Gus, though, avoided his eye. I'll see you at the stables, Woodrow, he said as he followed Inez Skull out the door. It's like eating green persimmons, the governor remarked darkly once the door was safely closed. What, sir? Call asked. Uncharitable talk, Captain, Governor Pease said with a sigh and a smile. Every time I talk to Inez, I come away feeling like I've eaten a green persimmon. You know how they make your mouth shrink up? I wouldn't know. I avoid green fruit, Call said. I've got to send you out, Captain. I gave Inez my promise, the governor said. But it's up to you what to say to Inish if you catch up with him. I might just tell him to keep on walking, Call said. That's right, let him wander, Governor Pease replied. Why come back just to be ate alive by your wife? If you got to be ate alive, let some cannibal Indian do it. The more the governor thought about Inez Skull, the more worked up he became. Damn rich women anyway, he said, particularly rich women from Birmingham, Alabama. He looked out the window for a bit, gloomily. Inez Skull would try the patience of a saint, Captain, he said, and then he paced the room for a few minutes, evidently unable to leave the subject of Inez Skull alone. Not just a saint, Job, he exclaimed. Inez would even try the patience of Job. I don't know Job, but she sure tried mine, Call said. As they walked up the steps of the Skull Mansion, Augustus began to feel timid and uneasy. Madame Skull had marched along nearly half a mile from the governor's office to the slope where the castle stood without saying a word to him. She had talked constantly while at the governor's, but now she was mute as a jug. Earlier in the day, in his vexation over Clara, Gus had kicked a large rock and broken his boot heel. He had been meaning to get it repaired when Woodrow showed up and stuck him in the governor's buggy. Now, as he was trying to keep up with the fast-striding Madame Skull, the wobbly boot heel broke off, which caused him to have to walk a little lopsided. His awkward, tilted stride seemed to amuse Madame Skull. "I believe I embarrassed your friend by accusing him of being a horror. Would you say I did?" she asked. "Yes, but it don't take much to embarrass Woodrow Call," he said. "He's still stiff as a poker when it comes to women." "Stiff as a poker? Do you mean that anatomically, sir?" Madame Skull asked with a little laugh. An old man with a rag was polishing the big brass knocker on the mansion's front door. The old man looked drunk, but he straightened up promptly when he saw Madame Skull. "Hello, Ben, this is Captain McCrae. He's going to find Captain Skull and fetch him home," she said. "We'll be having tea in an hour. Tell Felice we might appreciate a biscuit as well." Augustus thought that was odd. Why would it take an hour to make tea? Once in the door, though, he forgot about it. He had never supposed he would be in such a grand establishment. Everything in the house excited his curiosity. Just inside the door was a great hollowed-out foot of some kind that held umbrellas and parasols and canes and walking sticks. "I sure wouldn't want to get stomped by a foot this big," he said. "No, you wouldn't. It's an elephant's foot," Madame Skull said. "That tusk over the mantel came from the same beast." Sure enough, a gleaming ivory tusk, a little yellowish and taller than a man, was mounted over the mantel. The whole house was full of curious objects and gadgets that he would have liked to look at, but Madame Skull gave him only a moment. In the next room, a lovely yellow girl was polishing a long dining table with a cloth. He smiled at the girl, but she didn't acknowledge his smile. "Don't bring the tea into the bedroom, Felice. Just leave it outside my door," Inez said. "And don't rush us, please. Captain McCrae and I have some serious matters to discuss. Do you take jam with your biscuits, Mr. McCrae?" "Why, yes, I'd approve a little jam if it's no trouble," he said. "Why would it be trouble?" Madame Skull said. "Let us have a few dollops of jam, Felice." "Yes, ma'am," the girl said. Augustus wondered what it would be like to work with a blunt woman such as Madame Skull, but he was allowed no time to do more than nod at the girl. Madame Skull was ascending the long staircase, and she seemed to expect him to follow. On the second floor there was a long hall with high windows at both ends. A yellow bench stood against one wall. Gus was doing his best to hobble down the hall in his awkward boots when Madame Skull pointed at the bench and ordered him to sit. "I've had enough of your hobbling, Captain. Or may I call you Gus?" she asked. "Gus'll do, ma'am," he said, taking the seat she pointed to. "Let's get those boots off. I can't stand a hobbler," Madame Skull said. "I can take 'em off, ma'am, but it won't be quick," he said, a little surprised. "They're tight as gloves." "I'll help you, Gus. Stick out your leg," the lady said. "What, ma'am?" he asked, confused. "Stick out your leg, sir," Inez demanded. When he obeyed, she turned her back to him, straddled his leg, and took his boot in both hands. "Now push," she demanded. "Push with your other foot." Augustus did nothing of the sort. He was intensely embarrassed. Of course, the Rangers often helped one another off with recalcitrant boots by using that method. With a little pushing on the helpful Ranger's backside, the boot would usually come off. But Madame Skull wasn't a helpful Ranger. She was the wife of Captain Skull. Besides, she was a female and a lady. He couldn't stick up a dusty boot and push on her backside. "Ma'am, I can't. I'd be embarrassed," he said. Inez Skull showed no inclination to relinquish the foot she held between her legs. Her black skirt was bunched up around Gus's ankle. Gus was so embarrassed he was blushing, but Inez Skull had her back to him and didn't see the blush. "Push with your other foot, and push now," she demanded. "I'm damned if I'll tolerate any guff from you, Gus. I've helped Inish off with his boots 1,000 times in this way. He says I'm better than a boot jack, and I expect I am. So push!" Gus wiped his foot a few times on the floor and gingerly set it against Madame Skull's backside. He pushed as commanded, but not very hard, as Madame Skull tugged. "You're right, they're a close fit. Push harder," Inez said. Gus pushed harder, and Madame Skull tugged. To his relief, the boot finally came off. She dropped his foot, and he immediately withdrew his leg. "The other one don't fit as close. I can get it off myself," he said. Madame Skull was looking at him boldly. He had never had a woman look at him with quite such boldness. "Give me the other foot and shut up," she demanded. "Stick your leg out. Let's have it." Again, she straddled his leg. Since he had only a sock on his other foot now, Augustus was not quite so reluctant to push. He thought the best thing to do was finish the business of the boot removal and hope it would soon be time for tea. He pushed, and Madame Skull quickly got the second boot off and dropped it beside its mate. She didn't release his foot or his leg, though. Not this time. Instead, she held his foot tightly and began to rub herself against the leg that was now between hers. Augustus couldn't see her face, but again he was deeply embarrassed. Why would the woman forget herself in that way? He didn't say a word. He preferred to pretend that his officer's wife wasn't astraddle him, rubbing his bony leg against herself. It was a predicament so unexpected that he could not think clearly. Madame Skull continued with her activity for what seemed like several minutes. Gus began to hope desperately that a servant would wander upstairs on some chore, in which case surely she would stop her rubbing. Just when he thought Madame Skull might be ready to stop, she suddenly peeled off his sock. Once she had it off, she stroked his bare foot for a minute and then threw the sock across the room. "That sock's too filthy to wash," she said. "I'll give you a pair of ironishes when you leave." "Well, I guess I ought to get along and help Woodrow pretty soon, ma'am," Gus said. He was beginning to be actively fearful, his suspicion being that Madame Skull was a madwoman. No doubt that was why Captain Skull had decided to leave. Inez Skull didn't reply. Instead, to his horror, she pulled his bare foot up under her skirt and began to rub it against herself. Then she reached back, grasped his other foot, peeled the sock off, and stuck that foot under her too. She began to sway from side to side, rubbing herself with first one foot and then the other. Gus couldn't see her face, but he could hear her breathing, which was hoarse and raw. Then Madame Skull dropped his feet and whirled on him. He had been pulled half off the bench by her exertions already. Before he could scoot back, Madame Skull grabbed his belt and began to yank at it. She was breathing hoarsely, and there was sweat on her forehead and cheeks. "You said your friend Captain Carr was stiff as a poker with the ladies. Now let's see about you," she said. Augustus suddenly realized what Inez Skull had been talking about when she made that remark in the yard. He felt feverish with embarrassment as Madame Skull proceeded to unbutton his pants. What would Clara think if she knew? But then, as Madame Skull opened his pants and began to probe in his long johns, Augustus remembered that Clara was getting married. In only 2 days she would be Clara Allen. What he did with Madame Skull or any woman would not be something she would want to know. The thought filled him with hopelessness. But hopeless or not, Madame Skull was still there, hoarse and insistent. When he slipped down to the floor, he thought for a moment that she might smother him with her skirts. But Clara was gone forever. He had no reason to resist. In any case, it was too late. Madame Skull managed to scoot them over onto a big green rug in front of a closet of some kind. "This will be better, Gussie," she said. "We won't be bumping our knees on this hardwood floor." "What about?" Gus said. He was still nervous about the servants, but he never got farther with his question. Madame Skull overrode it. "Hush up, Gussie, let's trot," she said. "Just be my ranger boy, and let's trot."